Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It is Sunday, July 5th, the day after American Independence Day, and July 4th, 1776. Uh, the um, the Declaration of Independence was declared, and the United States became officially an independent country. So that's the good news. The so-called bad news is that while President Trump was praising us to the skies as being the greatest country ever in the history of the planet, probably in the history of the universe, um, he also said that there's a danger, which is that the communists are coming. We have to get rid of the communists. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to start off with a hard truth about the United States. And I'm going to read something. This was by George Carlin, a comedian who had very incisive understanding of what the U.S. system was about. So I'm just going to read through what he has to say here. And beneath that, in my Substack article, I will provide a link to the YouTube video where you can watch him say it himself. And further down, I've also got a couple of other videos, one by Danny Haifong and another one by Breakthrough News. And they're going to be talking about the 4th of July and what the meaning of that is. And I think these are people that whose opinions I respect, and I suggest that you listen to what they have to say. But let me proceed. So George Carlin says, "There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got, because the owners of this country don't want that." I'm talking about the real owners now, the real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You don't have freedom of choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They've got the judges in the back pockets, and they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all the news and information that you get to hear. They've got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interests. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by the system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, and the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later, because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. By the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged, and nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hardworking people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hardworking people continue, and these people are of modest means, continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all, at all, at all. You know, and nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on. The fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue dick that's being jammed up their assholes every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it. You know, as an aside, I saw a clip where some beautiful young woman won a beauty contest, or she was there. It was the finalists, and they ask a question to see if their beauty is matched by their intelligence. And the person asked this beauty contestant, why is it that Americans can't find the United States of America on a map? And she gave like a 5-minute answer where she could have just said, because they're stupid and they're undereducated. She could have just said that. She said, well, you know, blah, 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 blah. She went on and on for 5 minutes. She couldn't answer a simple question like that. And it just shows you that these are the kinds of, and then you wonder why, as George Carlin says, they're too dumb to know what's going on. So that's the issue. But Donald Trump is worried because there's some kind of political consciousness arising in the country. So we've got to get rid of the communists. Now, I just went to Russia, and I have Russian friends, and many of them support Russia, and some of them oppose Russian policies. There's a mix of different opinions. But a couple of Russian friends of mine told me that the Soviet Union was no good. Why? Because there was not enough choice of consumer goods, and there wasn't freedom of speech. Here in America, you have a choice of multiple forms of ice cream and bagels. We also have a choice of wars: Iran war, Gaza war, Ukraine war, Russia war, China war, Cuba war, Venezuela war. Seems like peace is not on the menu. We have free speech, as long as you don't step too far out of line. Like Edward Snowden, who had to flee to Russia to escape being sent to the dungeon. Or Julian Assange, who was in the dungeon and public pressure finally allowed him out. Mumia Abu-Jamal, he's been in prison for decades and decades, and they'll never let him out. Paul Robeson, he was a great civil rights leader, a great labor leader. He said when he went to the Soviet Union, he said that was the first time he ever felt free, because in America, he felt everything was just all about racism. And unfortunately, the CIA got got him in their clutches, drugged him up with drugs, and put him in a mental hospital. They electric shock treated him, and they really messed him up big time because he spoke the truth. The Rosenbergs, the Black Panthers, many of the Black Panthers were killed or forced to leave the country, and many of them are still in prison. These were people who were, handing out free food in Oakland, California, or carrying guns to protect themselves from the police. Martin Luther King, assassinated. Malcolm X, assassinated. Leonard Peltier, in prison for decades and decades. They finally did let him out. So to say that there's free speech in the United States is that's a fantasy. Now, here are some of the things you should oppose. This is what the communists do. We cannot have communism in the United States. This is bad for us. We don't want guaranteed housing. So in the Soviet Union, they had a housing crisis because they were industrializing the country very fast, and people were doubling up in apartments, and they created a massive housing program, and it took years, but it might take 10 years, but eventually you got your own house, you got your own apartment, and I actually stayed with people in their apartments that had been handed down to them from their family that the government had given to them. Guaranteed housing, guaranteed education to any level. They were trying to get the population to be as educated and intelligent as they possibly could. Guaranteed pension. free or nominal cost of summer camp for kids, nominal cost for spa treatments. If you had some kind of physical problem, long-term problem, you could go to a spa and get treated for it. Of course, they had guaranteed health care. The food in the Soviet Union and even in Russia now is not loaded with GMOs and chemicals. And two of the most important things, the natural resources of the country, the oil, the gas, the gold, the minerals, all of those things, those were collectively owned, and the profits for those went back into the public coffers so that people would be able to live their life, and the dividends were not going to big corporations. And likewise, profits from government-owned businesses were recycled to benefit the people, not dividends for fat cats. One of the reasons why the U.S. Military-industrial complex is failing in many of its wars is because, and this I have this personal friend of mine used to work for Lockheed Martin, and he said, one of the higher ups said, we don't make weapons that work, we make weapons that make profits for our company. And then you wonder why we lose our wars. That's one of the big reasons why we lose our wars. We make second-rate weapons. Now, it's true that the standard of living in the Soviet Union wasn't as high as the West. That's quite true. But the West didn't lose 15% of its population in World War II. It didn't see a third of its country totally decimated and its industrial base crushed by an invasion. It didn't have its younger generation of its most dedicated people killed in order to protect their country. So after World War II, most of our soldiers, we lost 400,000, not 27 million. And we had the GI Bill, which gave them free education. And so you had an educated population, and that was one of the bases for the U.S. Industrial success during the 1950s, 1960s. So that was an example of socialism in action in our own country. But they basically, it's virtually non-existent. Yeah, you can hire yourself out as a mercenary to fight in one of America's wars, but that's if you don't come back with serious mental problems or physical disabilities. But after World War II, the vast majority of the veterans got free education. And it should be free education for everybody, because when you have an educated, healthy population, you have a successful society. But that is not how the United States is set up. And Trump says, oh, we can't have that. That's communism. I'll add also that after World War II, the United States helped out. They loaned money to Europe to rebuild. The Soviet Union didn't get that kind of help. In fact, the Soviet Union was immediately under attack in the Cold War. I've discussed that in other videos. Franklin Delano Roosevelt didn't want a Cold War, and Truman and the powers that be in the deep state of the United States, they cannot stand a competitor to their capitalist system. That's the bottom line. So Trump, the billionaire real estate guy who is notorious for his shady deals, for his abusive treatment of women, his fraudulent Trump University and his stiffing his subcontractors for the fees that they earned. This is the guy who's running our country. And he's an interesting bookend for George Washington, who was also a realist. He also made his money in real estate. But at least he did at least fight for the country. We'll give him that. The U.S. Declaration of Independence complained about red-skinned savages whose land the Europeans stole, which indicates early on the racist nature of the founders. So you go to their land, you steal their land. When they try and defend themselves, you call them savages. Who's the savage here? The U.S. Constitution initially allowed only white men with property to vote. So women, blacks, slaves, and regular workers even those who fought for freedom weren't allowed to vote. It didn't even count African slaves as fully human. They're only 3/5 of a human. The point being that from the very beginning, even the July 4th Declaration of Independence, the general tone of the country was set. Slavery, genocide, constant war, and private property over common wealth and common good. Yet we're told how free we are and how all men are created equal, and that we have, as Abraham Lincoln said in his famous Gettysburg Address, the United States is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Here's what Abraham Lincoln said of those who died in the Battle of Gettysburg, and this is during the U.S. Civil War, a very bloody battle, and he was asked to give us a speech at the memorial for it. He said, and listen to this carefully because he's speaking to us today. He said, "It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which here they gave the last measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." President Trump and his allies in the political class, both the Democrat and the Republican parties, they don't want a government of, by, and for the people. They want a government of, by, and for those who pay and enrich them at our expense. The Musks, the lobbyists, the military-industrial complex, the think tanks, the academia gravy train. One thing George Washington got right was his warning not to get involved in entangling alliances. Yet under the Trump administration, the U.S. and Israeli military will be just that, entangled. There's a new law about to be passed, making the United States and Israel basically complete partners in the U.S. military-industrial complex. So they have complete access to everything. Israel is subsidized with billions in U.S. aid, yet every citizen of Israel has free health care. Most of us in the United States don't. So the conclusion: the U.S. Civil War only partially solved the problem of slavery. It did not solve the problem of inherent racism, genocide, private property, and an oligarch-controlled banking and political system, which have been acting like a ball and chain on the country's progress. Nor did it solve the problem of U.S. imperial ambitions, which have resulted in nearly constant imperial wars. As Smedley Butler, the very great Marine Corps hero, said in 1934, "I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism." So Trump is scared. People are finally catching on. We have conservatives like Judge Andrew Napolitano saying that the socialist leader of the Workers' Party, George Galloway in the United Kingdom, and he said that, this was, I guess it was Napolitano, said that he would be the prime minister. If the UK were a democracy, George Galloway would be the prime minister. He's got a great following on YouTube, and he has excellent commentaries. You should definitely check him out on YouTube. Then you have an avowed communist YouTuber and ex-influencer, Jackson Hinkle. He's a young guy in his 20s. And he's urging conservative Tucker Carlson to run for president. It shows that a broad-based consensus is forming. Recent elections even challenged the Democratic Party inner circle. This coalition is anti-imperial, anti-endless war, and anti-class war, and it's for the people. So let's set our eyes on the prize and see if we can finish what started 250 years ago. The U.S. Revolution was an unfinished revolution. It was sidetracked by oligarchs and slaveholders who wrote the Constitution after the people did the fighting, dying, and bleeding to free ourselves from the British. So that's our task. We need to finish this American Revolution. So thanks again for listening. Please like and share what I've done here. Please make a donation if you can. Share this, as I say, share it with your friends. You can also go to my store and buy my information billboard T-shirts like this one. It says "Be kind." I'm not trying to promote a brand. I'm trying to promote ideas. I'm trying to get people to talk with each other about the issues that face us that are critical and that we need to think about. So please, support my channel and pass the information around so that we can, finally get the country moving again. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you soon.